The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
But I am telling you right now,
we need a great reset.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Welcome to In Dark Places. I'm your Huckleberry, Junebug Fugit. When I was in junior high and high school, all the other kids made quite a bit of sport of me. It was torture. And that's one of the main reasons why we decided that we were going to homeschool Brandon, so he wouldn't have to go through all that. That, plus the morons who say that it's okay for boys and girls to use the same bathroom. And all that other indoctrination junk that happens at schools these days. I might have mentioned this on the show before. I don't know. I probably did. If I did, you're going to hear it again. I had this little group of like 7 people at school who I trusted. They were my friends, and they didn't make fun of me. And there was this other group of outcasts that we would kind of watch from a distance. The same kids that were making fun of us were making fun of these guys. I don't know why we never joined forces with those guys and just made one big super group of nerds, but it never did happen. Some of these guys were Jack and Jeff and a guy named Antonio. There were a couple of other guys. I don't really remember their names or nothing. But all those guys mostly just turned to drugs after school as a result of their beatings and whatnot from the guys who made fun of them. So they grew up to become drug addicts and junk and didn't really have good lives. I see that guy Jack in the store where I work sometimes. He has a wife and kids. He seems to have made it. Jeff has been in and out of prison numerous times. All those guys, though, they were just messes after we got out of school. And they were never really quite normal. You know, because of those guys who were making fun of us, who were also making fun of them. And it's kind of weird how it all turned out, because me and my group, we all turned out pretty good. But it just kind of messes with my mind that those guys ended up on drugs and everything because of being made fun of. Different paths chosen and such. Kind of trippy. But I was thinking about that one guy, Antonio, a couple of days ago. After we got out of school, a lot of people thought that he kind of slipped off the deep end. He would dress up like the Crow and hang out at the mall. He did that for a couple of years, and then he kind of just stopped. I would see him up at the mall from time to time, and I'd talk to him a little bit here and there. Sometimes it was kind of hard to get away from him. He would just keep talking. I was normally in a hurry and didn't really want to talk, but I would be there for him and kind of listen and help him get stuff off his chest, I guess. Sometimes I would kind of wonder if the government was doing experiments on him or something, because he seemed real paranoid. He would talk about how his ex-wife's brothers, or some people in her family or something, would just take off with him and kind of torture him and stuff, and then just kind of dump him out on isolated roads and stuff when they got done with him. It's kind of weird. One of the last times that I talked to him, he kind of brought up the Crow thing and said a lot of people thought he was crazy because he was dressed up like the Crow, and he was planning on going to start doing that again soon and stuff. And I was like, yeah, right on, man. Be you. And the last time I saw him, I was in Walmart, and he started talking about how these guys beat him half to death and covered him with gas and threw him in the trunk of a car and set the car on fire and everything, and how he got out of it. And I didn't really believe him and stuff. I guess he knew that it was a little far-fetched, and he started pointing out all his scars, and he's talking about, look, I don't have any eyebrows. And I was like, oh yeah, you don't. I felt kind of bad for the guy. just a really bizarre situation. And he died in September of 2020. I don't know if he committed suicide or if those guys finally got to him and beat him to death or exactly what happened. So I was looking at his obituary the other day, trying to refresh my memory. Kind of freaked myself out seeing that it's been 4 years since he died. And I saw that his birthday would have been on July 22nd. So, happy birthday, Antonio. And I hope you've kind of found some kind of peace now. Assassination attempts aside, here's what's happening in the news. Mystery monolith removed by Colorado farm by Tim Banal. A mysterious monolith that recently appeared on a Colorado farm has been removed by the property owners after they grew tired of having to contend with the hundreds of visitors that the peculiar pillar attracted. The odd metallic object made headlines in late June after it popped up on a hill at the Morning Fresh Dairy Farm in the community of Bellevue. Around a week later, owner Lori Graves lamented that the piece was more of a curse than a blessing, as their land had become inundated with curious onlookers, including many unruly individuals who left trash at the site or trespassed onto the property to examine the object up close. Perhaps concerned that the property could be swarmed by visitors over the long holiday weekend, I guess 4th of July maybe? I don't know. The farm opted to put an end to the monolith's moment in the sun by having it removed last Wednesday. Announcing their decision on social media, they indicated that they maintain possession of the piece and are keeping it safe, with the offer to return the pillar to its creator should they contact the farm. While some mourned the loss of the monolith due to the misbehavior of a few troublesome individuals, more skeptical observers online suggested that the entire situation was the farm's own doing as a clever publicity stunt that seemingly far exceeded their expectations.
Monolith, 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 monolith. It's the monolith song. It's the monolith song.
The monolith song that never gets old.
Howdy, In Dark Places listeners. In 1994, 1995-ish, my building in Connecticut closed, and instead of getting laid off, we had the option to go to a new building being built in Florida or one being built in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I chose Lancaster, Pennsylvania because my mother used to go visit the Amish once a year, do a little touristy thing there. And when I moved there, I learned that the locals call it Lancaster. I refuse to call it Lancaster, so any locals, I'm calling it Lancaster, and that's why. I found this book I bought when I was there called Haunted Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to share a few stories from this little book here. This one's called The Goat. A young Columbia couple, armed with a camera, set out on a brisk February afternoon hike. Their sunny afternoon stroll was a pleasant break from several days of winter rain, and they headed for a little quarry situated south of Manor Street and behind the Columbia Airport. This is Columbia, Pennsylvania, kids. Knowing the area, they headed down the wall of the quarry to where a chiseled-out section of rock formed a very shallow cave. The young woman reached the cave first and squatted under the protective walls of the rock while she waited for her camera-wielding husband to descend the narrow path. Suddenly, several rocks bounced down the slope, and the young woman quietly peered out, hoping to see a raccoon, fox, or some other woodland creature. Much to her surprise, standing on the ledge above was a long-haired goat with unusually long, graceful horns, staring back at her. She quickly scanned the hill, hoping to get her husband's attention. Possibly he could get a picture of the unexpected creature. There was her husband, halfway down the hill, smiling and waving, looking up in the direction of the goat. She asked him if he got the picture of the goat. Puzzled, he replied, "Goat? What goat? I was waving at 3 people up on that ledge. See?" When he looked back again, they were gone. Climbing back up the hill to investigate just who saw what, they reached the ledge above the cave. The soft, wet earth showed no trace that something had tread there, animal or human. Her husband, who had been too busy waving a greeting to the people he saw, never took a picture. That's a weird story right there, fellas.
Jimmy Haunted. Thank you, sir. He's getting ready for Paracon on July 20th and 21st up in Stratford, Connecticut. I went to Lancaster one time. I was on a college trip. We were going to go to New York and Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., all on a little college trip. On the way up to Philadelphia, we stopped at Lancaster. It's a pretty cool little place. I can totally see myself living there in times like this. Crazy world. And we went to Philadelphia, stayed there a couple days, and that's a cool place too. Shout out Philly! We went to New York for a couple days, and it was right after the first World Trade Center bombing. We didn't get to go into the World Trade Center because of security and stuff, because of that first attempt. But we drove by there in our little charter bus, and we sat there out in front of the building and looked at it and said, "Yep, there it is." And we were going to go to the Statue of Liberty, and it was closed for renovations, so we just took a ferry and kind of floated out by it. Said, "Hey, look, there's a Statue of Liberty all covered up there and stuff." And we went back. We did go to the Empire State Building. We got to do that. And then we went back after our couple days stay, and we went to Washington, D.C., just kind of visited there, just passing through. But I remember that we were walking by Arlington Cemetery, and I was looking over in there and like, oh yeah, that's cool. And I wasn't paying attention where I was going, and I bumped into this guy, and he's kind of rude. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, forgive me," stuff like that. And like, pretty sure he grabbed me inappropriately whenever I bumped into him. It was strange. If you're subscribed to the classic episodes of Haunted Chronicles on YouTube, there was an episode this past Friday night, the episode of Bizarre Deaths from October 12th, 2018. We had Strange and Bizarre Deaths in Dark Places way back on episode 49. So I started thinking, it's been a while. This week on the show, more Strange and Bizarre Deaths. In 1988, a dog fell from a building in Buenos Aires, Argentina, landed on a woman's head, killing her and the dog instantly. And then another lady, completely confused, watching the event unfolding from the middle of a road, was run over by a bus. And then, shortly after that, an older man died from a heart attack, out of the commotion of seeing both deaths. This happened in under a couple minutes. Number 2. I heard that a sinkhole formed under some man's bedroom and took him with it. It was so deep that they couldn't find him. Definitely a unique death situation. Number 3. My mother-in-law used to be a surgeon. She told me about a patient they had back in the 90s. He died because of holding in a sneeze. Turns out he had an aneurysm in his brain that popped at that moment. Innocent people have gone to jail for murder because the real explanation for why someone died was so rare and infrequent that courts didn't believe those explanations as plausible. 2 cases off the top of my head. Lindy Chamberlain, a dingo, actually did eat her baby. Kathleen Fobig had 4 children die from a rare genetic mutation. Number 5. Laughing to death. 50-year-old Alex Mitchell could not stop laughing for a continuous 25-minute period, almost the entire length of a TV show called Kung Fu Capers, and suffered a fatal heart attack as a result of the strain placed on his heart. Alex's widow later sent the goodies who were starring in that show a letter thanking them for making his final moments so pleasant. Number 6. Drowning in the desert. A guy got caught in a box canyon during a flash flood. The water was quickly reabsorbed into the dry desert soil and left a drowned man in the middle of the desert. Strange and bizarre deaths. The guy's beard was so long that when he tried to flee a house fire, he tripped over it and broke his neck, falling down the stairs. Dude was a mayor too. Hans something or other. These are all professionally written. Fatal familial insomnia. You can't sleep, and you don't sleep until you die, and it runs in the family. Number 9. I used to work with a man who had an older relative come to the hospital with symptoms suggesting a stroke, and he died that evening. I don't remember all the details, but everyone thought the family might be sitting on a big fat lawsuit until the labs all came back. The relative had a type of leukemia that is diagnosed about 10 times a year in the U.S., and they've never come up with a chemotherapy protocol for it because nobody has ever lived long enough for them to do so. Number 10. According to legend, Greek philosopher Aeschylus was killed when an eagle dropped a turtle on his head, mistaking his bald pate for a rock. That one guy who died after getting stuck face first in an extremely claustrophobic cave. They could get to him, but couldn't get him out. Just left his body in the cave and cemented the thing shut. Nutty Putty Cave. Number 12. Beaver bites. I always think about that guy in Belarus. In 2013, a fisherman in Belarus was trying to take a photo of a beaver when it bit him on his thigh, severing an artery and killing him. Number 13. Some rich lady in the early days of automobiles was known for always wearing long scarves, and one day it got caught in her wheels and snapped her neck. Strange and bizarre deaths. Drinking too much water. A woman named Jennifer Strange died of water intoxication while she was trying to win a Wii. A radio station had a contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii, where you had to drink as much water as possible without going to the bathroom. She drank nearly 2 gallons of water and ended up dying. The radio station's parent company paid over $16 million to her family in damages. Number 15. Every year, a small handful of people still have polio on their death certificates. Post-polio syndrome can develop decades after a person is first exposed to polio, and it's occasionally severe enough to kill someone. Number 16. When I was an emergency call taker, we had an accident where the guy carrying his plate back to the kitchen slipped, fell, and cut his own throat with a broken plate shard. He bled out before services were able to get there. Number 17. This woman was getting a drink and had a metal straw in her cup. She slipped and the metal straw punctured her eye and went through her brain.
This next story is called The Haunted Mill House. Along the banks of the Conestoga River, on the outskirts of Millersville, stands a 19th century mill house, situated at the end of a dead-end road. The mill is removed from the hustle and bustle of traffic, a rather quiet place, It was home to a young married couple, Greg and Karen D. Mrs. D sent me a written account of a series of strange occurrences that happened to her in the house. These events, Karen thinks, were caused by the spirit of a young child, in ghost terms referred to as a poltergeist. According to Karen, things began to happen around the time she and her husband started to discuss plans to move to another area. It was March of 1992, around 9 p.m. Karen, a full-time college student at Millersville University, was sitting on the floor in the living room working on a school project. Her husband was upstairs sleeping. The family cat balled up at his feet. Sitting amid her array of school materials, her body was facing the television so she could grab a glance of the screen every now and then. I felt something push my right shoulder as if it was trying to get my attention, said Karen. She quickly turned around, fully expecting to see what her husband or her cat wanted. Nothing was there. Karen continues. For a few moments, I had myself convinced that I had not felt a thing. Then, suddenly, I felt a push on my right thigh, as I was now lying on my left side watching TV. Once again, I turned around and absolutely nothing was there. This time, I knew that I had experienced something, but was not sure what it was. To be quite honest, I was quite perturbed at the thing which kept picking on me, so I said aloud, "Whatever or whoever you are, please leave me alone. I am trying to work." That was the last I felt of the pushes. Now, on this poltergeist's, to the poltergeist benefit here, this girl was supposed to be working on her project, as she stated earlier. She had the TV on in the background, kept glancing at it, but she wasn't concentrating on her work. Now, what do we tell little kids nowadays? This is a college girl, not paying attention, and then she even says later, "Now I'm fully focused on the television." I hope she passed that course. Badly frightened, and the fact that Karen's husband worked third shift, she spent the next several weeks sleeping on the downstairs sofa. Finally, she summoned enough courage to spend the night alone in their own bed. At 6 a.m., she was rudely awakened by 5 incredible loud booms. She sat bolt upright, swung her legs out over the bed, stood up, and reached for the rifle and shells. Calmly and quietly, she telephoned her parents. They suggested she check for footprints in the freshly fallen snow. No footprints. The joint decision was made that she make her way downstairs to the extension telephone, fully prepared to shoot anything that moved along the way. When she got to the stairway, she was greeted by their cat, who had transformed into a giant fur ball and seemed as frightened as she was. Safely reaching the telephone in the kitchen and finding no intruder, she called her mother back with the news. That was the last night she slept upstairs alone for a while. A little public service announcement. If you hear loud booms in your house that aren't supposed to be in there and no one else is there, and don't call your mom, call the police. Thank you. Months passed. Karen became weary of the couch and courageously returned to her own bed. At 2 a.m. that morning, she was awakened by a loud beep, beep, beep sound. Somehow, the clock radio in the bathroom across the hall had turned on, but the regular 24-hour country music station that it was always turned to was not to be heard. Thinking her husband had left it on, she turned it off and went back to bed. The next day, she was surprised to hear that her husband wasn't responsible for her brief awakening. He had used the downstairs bathroom the evening before. It was back to the downstairs couch for Karen. Shortly after retiring, The beep, beep, beep noise began again. Karen said, "This time I knew that my husband did not use the bathroom before going to work. And how in the world did that clock radio turn itself on?" Needless to say, I was quite afraid. However, I had to go and turn the radio off, for it was that loud I couldn't have possibly slept. This time I unplugged it and packed it away in a box the next morning. I couldn't come up with any possible explanation as to what I experienced, and neither could anyone else. According to Karen, there are other weird events that took place in the house for which she has no explanation. Strange flashing and dancing lights appeared to race through the spare bedroom, which adjoined their bedroom. Those lights couldn't be explained, for the house was situated at the end of a dead-end road. There was no traffic, nor was there a dusk till dawn light on their property. Karen summed up her thoughts about the noisy activity. Later on, I found out there was once a little girl who died in the house around the turn of the century. Her remains were found by the builders who were constructing an addition onto the mill house. It is my opinion that it was the little girl who was doing different things to me, but in a playful manner. Before we left the house in July of 1992, I told her what we were doing, moving to another residence, although I fully expected something more to happen, but no incidents took place after that. Or you had a defective clock radio. Thank you.
Strange and bizarre ways to die. Urinating off a New York City subway platform. Fun fact, it has happened more than a few times. My dad worked at a paper mill that had a very large chipper wheel. It would grind up all the entire truck of large trees in a few seconds. The whole building shook. At least 3 men went through that wheel that I know of, maybe 4. I'm not sure about one in the 1940s. They also had a thing called a hydropulper. It was a large, round metal tank that held water and paper fibers, with a large electric motor and propeller at the bottom. A guy fell in one. Dad said it just pumped stock and all into the Potomac River. Super nice patient where I used to work was employed by one of the charity companies that uses donation boxes in parking lots to allow for donations. His co-worker was taking the bags and tossing them into my patient to then toss into the truck. One was tossed, he dropped it, and died. Someone accidentally donated a gun. When the bag dropped, the gun went off and shot him in the head. Never knew what hit him. Investigators found the origin of the bag, and the wife put things to donate at the top of the linen closet. Her husband thought the top of the linen closet was a good place to keep the gun away from the kids. One day she grabbed all the stuff at the top of the closet and placed it in a garbage bag to donate. Back in my grandparents' day, no one had electricity. They had big pots they heated their water in over a fire outside to wash clothes, etc. My grandma's baby sister fell into a pot and was boiled alive. Strange and bizarre deaths. In 2013, there was a boy killed in an airport when one of the overhead signs fell off the ceiling. Drowning in an elevator. A couple in Tel Aviv lived in a building which had an elevator going down to the parking garage. Due to the heavy rainfall, the elevator flooded while they were in it. It doesn't happen often. In fact, I think it's really rare. But there have been grown adults who have been killed by chickens. With roosters, specifically, a lot of them have a big spur on each leg. This is like a big horn with a sharp tip. Some of those roosters can get pretty aggressive. Like that one we've got out in the backyard. That thing is crazy. Brandon hates it. It always crows all through the day, and yells at it constantly, trying to make it shut up, and it drives him crazy. He hates the rooster. But anyway, like, they might just decide to jump up at you and try to stab you in the face. I think as recently as last year, there was a guy who got killed by a rooster. It kicked him in the thigh, but it severed his femoral artery, and he bled out in a matter of minutes. I don't know if it's extremely rare, but in this day and age, it's pretty unheard of because of the access to healthcare the first world country has. My friend died of an ear infection last year. For context, we are in Australia, so we don't have to pay for emergency hospital visits. Cost of treatment was not an issue. She went to the hospital 3 times and was turned away twice. The third time, the doctors basically told her the infection was so bad that they could not treat it. The next day, she was in an induced coma for 2 days, and she was gone. Strange and bizarre deaths. Someone left a note and jumped. Meanwhile, a few apartments down, a home invasion goes wrong and shots were fired. The jumper died from a stray bullet. Death caused by an infection, and that infection was caused by another piece of human lodging inside of you from someone closer to the bomb blast. One person accidentally swallowed molten metal because of a fire. His doctor didn't believe him, so he died. And when doing the autopsy, it was revealed that he did indeed swallow some metal. The autopsy report sounded so fake that some doctors thought that he had lied in the report. Strange and bizarre deaths. If you jump into a freshwater lake without holding your nose, and if the water gets up your nose, that's how some people have rarely gotten a brain-eating amoeba that will kill you within 2 weeks. Naegleria fowleri is typically found in bodies of warm fresh water such as ponds, lakes, rivers, hot springs, warm water discharge from industrial or power plants, geothermal well water, poorly maintained or minimally chlorinated swimming pools, water heaters, soil, and pipes connected to tap water, and can be pathogenic, causing an extremely rare, sudden, severe, and usually fatal brain infection called gliriosis, or primary amoebic encephalitis, which has a 98.5% fatality rate within 1 to 2 weeks of getting infected. Water up your nose.
This story is called A Soldier's Cry. In April 1917, the United States entered World War I. One young man of 17 who lived in rural Colombia enlisted in the U.S. Army and was shipped overseas to fight the Germans. It was now July 1918, and the combined American and French forces started to make their first series of counter-offensives, attacking the Germans along a 30-mile front from Soissons to Chartres, France. The young Columbia man was to face his first battle along that front that hot July day. As I'm reading this, it's a hot July day. Coincidence? I think not. That hot July day found the young soldier's parents at home on the outskirts of Columbia. Mother was working in the kitchen, and father was seated in the outhouse, probably reading a Sears catalog. That's my favorite part so far. While working over the stove, his mother was surprised to hear her soldier son call her name. She quickly turned around, expecting to see her boy standing behind her, but found the room empty. Again, she heard him call to her, this time his voice coming from outside, although the open kitchen window. That's what it says. Through the open kitchen window, I believe they wanted to say. Dropping her spoon, she rushed outside, shouting to her husband, "Pop, Pop, did you see John? He just called to me." At the same time, her husband ran from the outhouse and shouted, "Mother, did you hear John call? He called twice." His mother had a foreboding feeling about that experience. She told her husband she felt something terrible had happened to their boy. Word was received a few days later that their son was killed in action in the first few minutes of battle at Chateau, France. His beckon was from across the sea to the loved ones at home, was heard at exactly the same time that he received his wound, which killed him almost instantly. His body was not returned home. John, forever aged 17, is buried in Flanders Field.
About 12 years ago, my dad's coworker went missing, along with 3 other travel companions of his in a remote mountain region, and never to be found to this day. They were experienced hikers, so we were guessing they must have been caught in a landslide from all the raining. But their bodies weren't recovered, so we'll never know for sure. The crazy thing is, we ran into him about 3 days before he set out for that never-returning journey at a restaurant. I still somewhat remember how he looked, and never thought that'd be the last of him I've seen, or anyone. Just disappeared into thin air, like dust. Declared missing for many years, to no avail. Strange and bizarre deaths. Death by constipation. Gernard Renstadler was a ski racer. During training for a competition, he lost control and crashed into a safety net at high speed. When he crashed, the tip of one of his skis caught the net. The forward momentum kept him moving forward, still at speed. And the best way I can describe it would be, he got wishboned. Suffered a severe pelvic fracture, as well as internal injuries / bleeding. He died later that night. The uncle of a high school friend hit a deer with his car. Got out to move the deer off the road. It was stunned, but still alive. Kicked him in the forehead and instantly killed him before it jumped up and ran into the woods. And that reminds me that one of my uncles told a story about a guy who hit a buck. Its antlers went through the windshield and impaled the driver. A dream vacation to Alaska. A whole family goes as a big group with the parents. Their adult children, spouses, and partners are all included. The group is on a guided tour of a glacial cave where everything is all good, and many people throughout the day toured through the ice cave with nothing amiss. But when this family is touring through the cave, a chunk of ice falls loose, killing their 32-year-old daughter. TLDR. I've addressed this before. Stop abbreviating everything. I don't have any clue what that means. But death from a piece of ice falling from the ceiling of a tourist trap, Alaskan cave. The Sally Clark case. Sally lost multiple infant children to sudden infant death syndrome or similar, but people got sus and decided she'd murdered all her kids. A guy named Meadows infamously claimed 1 child death in a family is a tragedy. 2 or more is murder.
Murder.
He also claimed the chances her kids died of natural causes were 1 in 73 million. This would mean, mathematically, that a double cot death in one family should only ever occur once in 100 years. The prosecution refuted any claims the children could have had some infections or sickness. Cherry-picked sections, sometimes just a few lines from her diaries, were used to catch her up in this big lie, even though she never directly admitted any harm to her kids. She was set upon by the press in the most hostile way I've ever seen. She was called the UK's worst mother, pure evil, the most wicked woman in the UK. This, mind you, was Ho Rose West and Myra Henley were both still alive and in prison. She was called worse than Rose and Myra. I don't know who those people are. Never heard of their stories. But she was completely innocent. Completely. So it turned out that one of the babies had staph in his lungs, and that is why he died. The prosecution knew this and hid the evidence. And Meadows, their star expert witness, was a liar. He based his statistics on this idea that sudden infant death syndrome deaths are all independent, even in the same home. So if one family loses 2 babies, there is no connection, according to Meadows, which is ridiculous, even though we knew sudden infant death syndrome had genetic causes and factors, which are then made worse by environmental factors. Climate change? The guy's everywhere. Even then we knew that if a family loses one child, then chances actually increase that they will lose a second, especially if we can't nail down exactly why the first baby died, because we can't manage or mitigate for those causes and make the next child safer. We knew then that this was actually less likely for a mother to murder multiple infants shortly after birth than it was for them to die natural. To be clear, it does happen, and such a case was going on at the same time as Sally, and Meadows was involved in that, which may have been why he was so sure of himself in Sally's case. But even taking that into account, Meadows' math is totally made up and had no basis in fact. Meadows had also consulted on a case in Australia which was almost identical, down to the eventual identification. That of those children, 2 died from genetic conditions, and 1 from a lung infection. I believe they couldn't test or be definitive on the 4th, but that woman was ultimately cleared. Sally Clark was cleared too, released from prison after a horrible time of it. She never recovered from it all and drank herself to death, because the prosecution hid evidence on purpose and Meadows lied on purpose. I also have to wonder what other harm his claims have done for the larger public. Did that ever cause harm to families or infants because people thought this? Strange and bizarre deaths. I recently came across a mid-mal case, I don't know what that is, about a patient in the surgical ICU after open heart surgery. PT had been closed up with a sternum wire on a Thursday. The doctor who did the work left for the lake house on a Friday and handed the case off to a covering CTS. Those abbreviations. There was some indication that the wire closure was failing on Friday morning. This lead was informed. Doctor decided it was probably fine and that they'd fix it on Monday if it wasn't. Patient had tons of complicating factors though, including lung disease and morbid obesity. The patient's coughing fits became worse and worse over the day on Saturday. 2 ICU nurses attending to him during one of these fits witnessed what I would call one of the most gruesome hospital deaths I've ever heard of. I've seen a lot of people die in hospitals. It's rarely a very dramatic affair, but yeah, this one. During a coughing fit, the wire holding PT's chest, patient's chest cavity together completely failed, opening the incision up. As the nurse pulled back the gown to see where the blood was coming from, a subsequent cough expelled the patient's heart from their chest straight into the hands of the nurse. So both of them are standing over this patient covered in blood, one looking like they just woke up in the Temple of Doom. They start trying anything to put this poor person back together. Of course, it's in vain. The patient rapidly goes into arrest and dies. You can't live long after flinging your heart out of your chest cavity. But as intuitive as that notion is, this is the only case I've ever heard of where it actually happened. We are woefully out of time this week on the show. Thanks for listening. If you have a true, scary story you'd like to tell and be a guest on the show, or if you have a show idea, or you just want to talk and hang out and say hey, you can send an email to indarkplacespod@hotmail.com. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless you.